Okie doke, welcome back. Welcome back after break. Just a quick note. If we look at the course webpage and the exercises and my getting started guide and the Hello World, first Hello World recording, this one, those are not updated with using ECMAScript modules. In those I am using CommonJS modules and require and import. So don't copy me on that one when you look at this one. I will do a new recording, probably tomorrow, maybe Friday. So there will be new recordings, but when you get started, please get started with exercises. Just remember that the exercises you are meant to use ECMAScript modules in those, and it will work. But you will not be able to get it to work with require and import anymore. Well, you could do that as well, but you need to edit the index.html. I could actually show you. So if I go into the exercise Tiny Tunes library repository, and we look, this is the repository, we look in the source folder, then we have an index.html. And in that index.html, you will see on line 5 that it says script type module source JS app.js. So this is utilizing the new ECMAScript module. Webpack will still build a bundle, but that bundle is served down here with a no module attribute as build.js, and this one will work in older browsers as well. But that is nothing you need to think about, actually. Just remember to use the new ECMAScript modules and you'll be fine. Okay. Let's start to write some code then, because now we know how to link our JavaScripts to the web pages. Now we need to start to do some magic. And we will do this magic by using something called a DOM. This is what we will do today. Oh yeah, so this lecture was I've split things up. This lecture was actually, today it's half a lecture, but it will take 2 hours. So I've split a lecture I had with had DOM and event handling in it before, and this one I will do a recording of until next week. But we will look at the DOM today, and the DOM is a tree representation of an HTML page and the HTML nodes, the elements on the page. So if you look at your right hand side, you see the HTML code. I've stripped some attributes and things, but just simple HTML. And this is actually represented with a data structure in the browser, and that data structure is called a DOM, and the DOM is a tree. So we can't have circular references, for instance. You can't place a p tag inside of a body that is inside the same p tag. That makes no sense, and you cannot do that, so hence this is a tree. And I think you can map this quite easy. We have a special element in the top called the document object. And on this document object you have an HTML element, being this one. We have in the HTML we have a head and we have a body. Inside of the head we have a title in this case. Inside of the title we have a text node, text element. Think you can map this quite easily. The DOM is not only a tree representation of the HTML page, it's also the API against the document when we use in JavaScript. So this is the API that we will use to work with elements on a page. Do you see something on the right-hand side that is not represented on the left-hand side? The closing tags, yeah. So in this case, those are, the yellow ones are called elements. And an element is a starting tag and a closing tag. So that is what makes up the element. We have, once again, order. Oh, well. Yeah. And it's actually the same order here. So this is an arrayish, it's a node list, it's a list of every level is a list. And this list, I'm pretty sure, will be consistent with the order in the HTML. So this being the zero element, first element, and second element being represented in that case. And yeah, so we have some kind of order. Anything else missing? Yeah, the attributes. Then we have the href and the source attribute. They are not shown here, but they are actually part of each and every element. Anything else missing? Yeah. And this is quite a tricky one that has dealt a lot of headaches for web developers during the years. White spaces are missing. This really, whoa, looks like this. Because when you develop, you tend to press enter after an element. You tend to have spaces indenting. And all of those are actually elements in this structure. So it actually, the correct representation is this one. Each and every element is showing. So if I were to ask how many elements has the body, you would probably say, oh, 3 children. But it actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 children, because it includes the white spaces. Going back to the war between Netscape and Microsoft, so Microsoft had quite a pragmatic view of making things in the browser. They saw this and they said there is never a developer that is interested in all of those white spaces. So Microsoft stripped them away. Did the other browsers do that? Did the standard do that? No. So in Firefox, the body would have 7 elements, or seven child elements. In Internet Explorer, it had 3. And I mean, it's irritating to work with those extra elements, of course, but it's even more irritating to working with 2 browsers that give you a different representation of the DOM. But that is what happened. This is the standard way of describing the DOM, and this is the way it is described nowadays. However, as we will see, we have some separate API calls for getting only the element nodes or also getting all text nodes. But we will have a look at that soon. I've represented those elements and nodes. I mean, a node, I got a question on this last year. A node is just something in this tree. This is nodes. The blue ones and the yellow ones are all nodes in the document object model. However, the yellow ones are called element nodes. And element nodes are like H1, script, P, A, yeah, the usual elements. The blue ones are called text nodes. We have comment nodes and the special document node. You will probably not work with those on an everyday basis, at least. However, you will work with element and text nodes. They also have a value. You can if you get a node and you don't know what it is, you can always look at its value and see if it has the node value of 1, then you know it's an element. If it has the node value of 3, then you know that it is a text element. And this was really useful when you had to like filter away all of those extra text nodes, because if you were to iterate over all the children in the body, you could have an if statement saying, okay, so if the node is of type text, ignore it and only work with the elements. And that was the way you had to do it, working with plain JavaScript. But when we had those problems, we also had libraries like jQuery that took care of things like this and problems like this. But we don't need jQuery today. Traversing is a fancy word for walking. Walking and navigating through the nodes. I mean, you could, you could end up in some circumstance that you have a reference to the body node, body element, and you want to visit all or do something with all of the child nodes to the body node. So if we have a reference to the body node, being this top node on the top of the page, we could call, for instance, start this one, first child. So if we have the node dot first child, we will get a new reference to this node, the first node, the first child node. However, first child and last child, they will point you to the first node, whatever node. In this case, this being a text node. So in the newer implementation of the DOM, we have something called first element child. And this one is probably the one you will need the most, because you are often interested in elements. So if you call first element child, you will get the P element, or what it was in the last slide. But if you call first child, you will only get the text element. When you are on a node, you can always call parent node, and you will get to its parent. No need for parent element, because it's only elements that could have children. You can use previous element sibling and next element sibling to go between siblings. And you can also use node dot children to get a node's all children nodes. And that will only get children will only get element nodes. The older one, child nodes, will get all nodes, including the text nodes. Yep.
Is there a previous sibling?
Yeah, I've excluded them actually. There is a previous sibling and a next sibling, but in reality, you very seldom use them. If your job is not to, if you're writing an editor, for instance, you will probably need to use them because you want to probably do something with the indentation in the editor. But in normal circumstances, you will probably use previous element sibling and next element sibling. So you can always, if you have a reference to an element, you can always find your way around the whole HTML element and get somewhere else. If your task is to change with JavaScript this A element's href, you want to change the href to something else using JavaScript, and you have a reference to that image. Do you think it's a good practice to do parent node, last sibling, first child, first element child? Is that a good way of like doing things like that? You're shaking your heads. No, because this is really prone to, if someone inserts an element somewhere in this child list on the body, it will break your application more or less. So there are certain circumstances when you need to like traverse the DOM. Often it's more like this A element has an image element inside of it, or this list element has an A element, and you got a reference to the list element. Well, use first element child then, and you get a reference to the A element inside of the list. But that is pretty much it. You never want to like walk along path inside of the HTML document if you're not creating some special kind of tool or something. But in normal circumstances, you do not want to do that. A better way is trying to select the node you need when you need it. Yeah, oh well, one more thing on this one. I've kind of illustrated this as an array of nodes, and you could look at it as kind of an array of nodes, but it is not an array. So you could, if you have your children, you can use brackets, and you can select the first one by writing a 0 inside of the brackets, and you will get the first one in the list. But this is something called a node list. And a node list and an array do not share prototypes. I will get back to that, but just bear in mind that this is called a node list and not an array. That would be quite important. Okay, if we want to select a specific node on the page, you can kind of draw the parallel to the style sheets or CSS. When you write CSS, you need to select something to be able to change that element. We have three methods. One called getElementById, getElementsByTagName, getElementsByClassName. So those three methods can be used to extract specific elements or get a reference to a specific element inside of the DOM. GetElementById will give you, will it give you a list or will it give you one object, one node? Yeah, it says so on the slide even. One node. Why only one?
ID is considered to be unique, I think.
Yeah. IDs, and we said this in the CSS lecture, IDs as an attribute on an HTML element must be unique on the page. However, in CSS you can cheat. You can have many IDs, and if you says that those IDs should be red, they will be red, for instance. However, in JavaScript you can't cheat because getElementById will only return a node element. Maybe the first one, maybe the last one, I don't know. You should never get in a situation where you have to depend on having the same ID twice on a page. Always unique. GetElementsByTagName. Well, an indication is that, okay, it says elements. You will get a node list back. You will get one of those lists back with all elements of a certain tag. So if you, I have an example down here. If you do a document dot get elements by tag name p, you will get all the p elements on the page as a node list. One important thing that I actually noticed when I was on the train, I didn't know this, but I learned today. So I better tell you guys as well. It could be important in certain circumstances. If you're using those, you will get a live list back. So the node list you get from getElementsByTagName is kind of live in the document. That meaning if you, for instance, want to you found all the p elements on the page, and you want to iterate over each and every p element and convert that p element to a div. You can do that. I don't know why you would like to do that, but you can. Then you need to remember that this node list is live. So if you do a getElementByTagName p, you get a reference to the first p element. You convert it to a div, hence you remove the p element. Then this list will remove that as well, and you have one less element in the list. So if you do that in a for loop, and you take the next node, then you will actually skip one node because that node will be shifted. So if you want to iterate over that kind of list, you should actually start from the back and work your way forward if you don't want to miss anything. Or do it you can work with the first one until the array is empty, node list is empty if you like. But this is a live updated. As soon as you kind of do a change, it will re-render and this list will be another list. The same goes for get elements by class name. I think I said in the CSS lecture, please use classes. If you want the behavior or add behavior to something that everything should be grayed out or inactive, use a class, and then we could add JavaScript to get all those nodes and do something with them. And we get an example, let tags document get elements by class name post, and we log the length. So we see, okay, we have 12 posts on this page, for instance. You can calculate stuff. Those are pretty, I mean, get element by ID, that is commonly used. It's been in the standard forever. Get elements by tag name as well. Get elements by class name. I'm feeling old if I say that it's new because it was new in like 2005 or something like that. But it's not been in the standard all the time. This was a really good use case for jQuery as well because you often use jQuery to get elements based on their class. Okay, but there is another way. Yeah.
Do you know why they behave this weird way?
No, I don't. You're referring to the live update. Yeah. No, I watched. I think I watched a video. No, I read in the book. Yeah, it says in the literature actually. I read the course literature, and it actually says that it's live updated. I've programmed in JavaScript for I don't know how many years, and I've never had a problem with it. So, but they apparently are. What is not updated live is a newer API called the Selectors API. And this one, I would probably recommend you using this because then you have one API for doing whatever you need to do. And if you're used to writing, which you should be, writing CSS selectors, the style selectors, then you can use this API. For it's the same selectors that you have in CSS, the same standard is being used for those as well. So instead, if you would like to find the element with the ID main, you do a document.querySelector. QuerySelector, the first one, will give you a node element back. QuerySelector all will give you a list back. But we do a QuerySelector of the main, and we will get the reference to that node. And QuerySelector all, and we write a P, then we will get all the P elements back from the page. Of course, we can do it like this, combine selectors, p.tag will give us all p elements with a class tag. What happens if we separate? Yeah, all descendants of a p element with a class set to tag. So simple, classical CSS selectors, and I can use, I guess, more or less all CSS selectors inside of this API. This will not give you live node list back. So what this will do is you get a node list, you can work with that node list, and after your code returns, the re-rendering will be executed. So in this case, I'm a little bit confused, but so when you get this live view back, it must update the DOM in the background somehow, and that I'm confused about. But whatever. Use this API in normal circumstances, and you'll be fine. It's a pretty simple API. This as well. How many has coded in jQuery before? Yeah. So if you have used jQuery, this was like one of the big things with jQuery, that you were able to select elements using CSS selectors. So it was adopted by V3C, I guess, and put into the standard. Yeah, as I said, the node list that you get back using one of those elements, those methods, is not an array. As last as 2 years ago, you could not use a for each iterator on a node list, because for each iterators were on the array prototype, but not on the node list prototype. However, now you can do a p-tag node list dot for each and use the iterator function for each on node lists. However, you cannot use map, for instance, reduce, filter, because they are not implemented on the node list prototype. An easy way to get around that is to convert the node list to an array. And you can do that by using the array from method. So in this case, I have a node list, the p-tags node list. I send it into array from, and I get an array of references to the nodes. And now I can iterate using map and reduce and whatever, if I like. Filter. In normal circumstances, you are probably good with for each, but filter could be quite good to have sometimes. You want to filter out some certain elements, depending with something you maybe can't do with a selectors API. Okay, questions so far? This part of the lecture is quite boring because there's only a lot of API calls, and I usually hate lecturing in APIs because it's kind of boring. But the DOM API is such an important one that I actually would like to go through it. This one is particularly boring, so let's go over it fast. I just want you to know that you can do those things, and it's really easy to find examples of how to do it. But of course, you can modify the DOM. You can take an element from one position and move it to another position. You can insert new elements, and you can remove old elements. I mean, that is, look in Slack, for instance. That is a big web app, as I said before. If someone starts to write something, you will see ... is writing something. Of course, that is only DOM handling. As soon as someone is writing something, an object is a node is inserted with an animated GIF or some whatever, and the text is added that someone is writing something. And as soon as it stops, they remove that element. It's as simple as that. Whoa, okay. Manipulation of the DOM. You can add nodes, and you use the API called append child. So if you have a node and you append a child to the node, the new node will become a child of this node, and it will be appended at the end of the list. If the new node is present in another place in the DOM, it will be removed from that place and moved, because a node cannot be in two places at the same time in a DOM structure. It's a tree, so you cannot have any circular dependencies. So if you append it, it will be removed from somewhere else, or if it's a new node, it's it's not in the DOM from the beginning, so it will not be removed from anywhere in that case. You have something called insert before, so if you don't want it to end up last in a list, you can use insert before, and you can place it exactly where you want it. Then you need a reference to the before node, so the node you want to insert it before. You can replace nodes, you can remove nodes, and you can make clones of nodes. And this one is quite important, that we will see soon. So if I take a node, for instance, remember the body node, for instance, or body element. If I clone the body element, I will get a new body element. And if I send in true, then I will make a deep copy. So I will get a copy of each and every element and their children and their children. So I will get a copy of a part of the DOM tree. And then I could insert this copy somewhere else. Body being a bad example because you should only have one body element. But if you have a div element, for instance, you can duplicate it and insert it somewhere else. Remember just that you can make a shallow or deep copy of that node tree. You can create nodes out of nothing. You have the document create element, which will create a new element node. You just say what you want it to be called. You can create a document text node, which will create a text node for you. Yep.
Using this possible, is it possible to create an entire page or like?
Yeah. So the question is it possible to create another a whole page, or do you need to create each and every element on its own? You will see soon. Because in this case, well, if you want to do it all from the beginning with a blank page, you will build up a big HTML page. Then you could actually start off by, okay, create element HTML. Okay, create element head. Append child head into HTML. Create element title. Append title into head. You can do that.
I'm talking about, my question was, since there are these platforms where you can create websites out of,
Yeah.
they use something close to this?
Yeah, I think you will get a question answered soon. It's really not the same thing because that is probably done server side, generating a web application. You could do that in JavaScript on the client as well if you like. You would probably not use this method because that would be, you will see, quite cumbersome. But remember we can create nodes. There are shortcuts though. Remember, Microsoft wants to do things easy for the developers, so many of the API calls that we have in the language that are short are Microsoft. Many that we have in the language that are longer, it's often V3C. Text content and in HTML is Microsoft implementations of, I think, both of them, at least in HTML. We can do something like this. Instead of creating a text node and appending the text node inside of the element, which is like a 3-liner or something, or 2-liner, you create the text node, append it inside of the element. You can just do element.text content equals, and you will create a text node inside of the element. If the element is not empty, if it has child nodes, those will be erased, and you will be replaced with a text node. On the same thing, you can do inner HTML to add HTML to an element. So you could more or less write a lot of HTML here and just insert it into an element, and that will generate a DOM structure. This text will be interpreted and rendered exactly the same way as if you write source code. So if you do something wrong, the browser will correct you, because it cannot create falsy code in the DOM. However, beware of inner HTML. I would almost go as far as telling you not to use it in the course, because if you're using it because you think it's just easier than doing other stuff, then you might get into trouble, because it will not, things can happen with event handlers and stuff that you don't expect. there are also security issues. As soon as you see injected code somewhere, you should always think security issues, because if you take code in the text format and try to insert it and get it interpreted somewhere, you can get an error. Maybe this text is coming from Twitter or some trusted partner, and you think it's okay, and suddenly they have a leak and someone is injecting code on Twitter, and you get this and it's injected in your site as well. So beware of inner HTML, because it's a little bit so-so. I will get back to better ways soon. Attributes. Of course, when you create an element, you want to attach attributes, you want to add attributes, you want to be able to read the attributes of an element. You have get attribute, set attribute, and remove attribute. Quite a simple API. That's what you expect it to do. Have an example. We're creating an image. On the image, we want to add a source element, source attribute, sorry, to point to image picture SVG. And then we do a query selector for main, and we append the new tag being the image, and we append the image to the page. When this code returns, or lets go of the main thread, often it means it returns and it's done executing, then this will be generated and rendered. And since a new image has arisen inside of the document, the browser will make a network call for that image, loading that image and inserting it into the browser. So this picture.svg is not there from the beginning, but as soon as this code returns, it will be fetched over the network. There are shorthands. Microsoft did a shorthand that you could like write, in this case, new tag.src equals, without using the set attribute. However, there are problems with that one. If you want to set the CSS class, you cannot write .class because class is a reserved word, so then you have some workarounds for that. I would say always use this standardized API, even though it might be a couple of more characters to write sometimes. And now I'm not doing it with styles, but whatever. I will. I'm always saying I will show a better way. I will. I promise. In the end, we will just show one way of doing this, but you will probably need to use those ways sometimes. So what I'm doing here, I'm selecting an element called discovery. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't matter. And then I change its color to that one by calling node.style.color. This is an API that Microsoft did as well. And then I changed the color like that. Is that a good way of doing it? No. You should always say no when I ask that question. You know that now. And that is exactly the same thing as doing that. Like adding the style attribute to the element itself. And we learned that we shouldn't do that. Not only that, since the one creating CSS was not a developer, that person injected dashes inside of the words instead of doing camel casing like any other normal developer would do. So in this case, it says font, it's dash, right? Yeah, dash size in CSS, but when using this way, we need to do font capitalized S for size. We have a CSS property called float. Float is a reserved word in JavaScript, so you need to add CSS float. And there are more like this, and it's just quite cumbersome to remember. And you should never do this anyway. Or there is one certain circumstance when it's actually a good thing to do that, or you might be forced to do that. And that is if you like, for instance, to move something over the screen using JavaScript, following the mouse or whatever, you might be forced to dynamically update, for instance, left and top on the style to do this kind of movement. there are probably there are certainly libraries that does this for you, but if you want to do it in raw JavaScript, I guess that is the way you have to do it. But we are trying to strive for separating structure, presentation, and behavior. And doing things like this is mixing it all up again. In certain circumstances, okay, but those are exceptions. How you should do that with styles is like this. You should use classes, CSS classes. So instead we do something like this. We create or we query and get a reference to the discovery element. And on that element, we use the class list API to add a class. So we add a class, CSS class, to that element. And we have the code for that, what those kinds of elements should look like in the CSS. So in the HTML, it will look something like this, class, whatever, and JS changed. Since I'm using this class list and doing add will add the JS changed. It will not overwrite if there is something there already. And in class attributes, you can separate different classes with a space. And in the CSS, I have a class that I call JS changed. And as soon as this P element will get that class, it will also get this CSS rule applied. So it will change its color. Now this is a really basic example. Of course, it would probably be a lot more CSS happening. For instance, a border appearing and a shadow and whatever. But it's just an example. On class lists, you have class list add. You have remove, will remove. Not all of them, you will remove a specific class. You can toggle a class. This one is particularly useful. So often you want something to be on or off with a class. It should have the class. If it don't have the class, it should add a class. If it has the class, it should remove the class. And that is toggling. So you could ask it to toggle JS changed. So if it had it, remove it. If it haven't got it, add it. And you can check if this list of class contains a specific class if you want to examine that. We will get back to this one during the peer instruction in a couple of weeks. Yeah, so this is a simple example. You can all, if you look at this, it's simple. You have a div element with post elements, and you have some UL element with list elements containing A elements. It's quite obvious, right? Okay. I actually don't think that is obvious. It's hard to read. It's hard to visualize because it's just a mess of code. That actually looks like that. Div class post, UL, list class active, href, the first link, the second link. That HTML, if you ignore the templates, is the same thing as all of those API calls. And this is getting closer to a question now, because this is not a good way of doing it, because you will, I mean, it's so easy to make something wrong, to add like the attribute on the wrong element, or add it inside of the wrong element. This is a much cleaner representation, to write the HTML in HTML. And that is why we have something called templates. So we can create a template. So this is written in HTML. Inside of the HTML document, I've written this template because this post, we can think about Slack once again. So, as soon as someone is posting something in the Slack client, I want to create a post like this and add it to the client. So I will need to do a lot of creating posts. Then I could render this one in HTML, connect the CSS to the class active and all of that, just like normal HTML. But instead of just adding it to the HTML, I add it inside of a template element. And this template element is a special element in HTML because the rendering engine will will totally ignore everything that is in between. It will just skip the template. It will see, oh, a template, and then it will start rendering after the template. The template will not be shown in any way on the HTML page. So it's a safe place to put this kind of code that you somewhere down the line needs to use. Okay, so we have this in HTML, and then we do a let template equals document query selector post template. So we get a reference to this template element. And then we create a clone using the clone node that we talked about before. So I take the template, I take the content of the template, everything inside of the template. I don't want to clone the template itself. I only want the content inside of the template. Otherwise, if I insert this template on another page, it will never render. So I need the content inside of the template. Could probably do template dot first element child dot clone node true, because we want a deep copy. We want to copy everything inside of this div. Then I get a clone, and then I take the body element and I pen the clone inside of the body, and it will end up in the end of the body element, or wherever we would like to place it. A much nicer way of pushing out content in the browser. This is a built-in template engine, since I'm not sure how. I'm actually not sure. Let's see. Template string, HTML templates. Yeah, it goes back pretty far in time. We have a good support everywhere. Not in Internet Explorer, but other than that, it's good support. There are libraries that do this for you, like mustache, underscore templates, handlebars, pug. There are a lot of templates engines that you can use, but if you can do it in standard mode in the browser without any libraries, well, why not? Well, there are certainly some limitations to this way of doing it, and you have probably, if you're using some of those libraries, you have broader support and things like that, but this is what I will focus on in the course. Throughout this course, I will kind of not look at libraries. I've gotten the question for like 10 years, why don't we learn jQuery? Because you don't need jQuery. That's why. So I try to kind of teach the standard way of doing stuff. Sometimes you will need to use libraries to have a fallback, but those libraries change all the time. The standard are probably there to stay, so that's why. Okay, templates. Use them. And this is what I said, that some of you will be afraid to use the template because you need to remember those 3 lines of code. Well, you don't need to remember. You need to have a bookmark on this page or on Mozilla page. But how to clone a template, just bookmark it and use templates. You will be so much easier off. And we will probably ask you on the examination, oh, why didn't you use templates? Oh, well, I don't know why I didn't. I used inner HTML, and then we will insert some bad code into your application and you will be so sorry. So try to use templates. They are not that bad. I will just like to show one thing. Now I'm doing exactly what I said I shouldn't. I'm using inner HTML. So you can create templates using JavaScript without being in the HTML page. By doing a create element on a template like that, and then I use inner HTML to populate the template with HTML element. This is kind of adding HTML to inside of the JavaScript, which breaks every rule I've talked about concerning separation of concern. However, if I back up to this one, this way of structuring your applications in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I've probably said it before, but that is kind of like sorting Lego by color. So, and that is a perfectly good way of sorting Lego if you want. But maybe you want to sort the Lego instead out of applications, so every part for cars or vehicles in one box and all parts for houses in one box. That is another way of sorting Legos. So this is not the only truth, that you should always separate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There are certain cases when it could actually be clever to sort it by functionality rather than by file ending. If you look in React applications, for instance, or any other framework, you will probably see that you tend to mix HTML and JavaScript a lot. And we will start to talk about something called custom elements soon, and that to get a nice structure on those custom elements, it could actually be a good thing to do stuff like this. It's not optimal, but it has its trade-offs. And we will actually get to that now, I think. But maybe we should have a break. So after the break, I will not code a larger example, but I will talk about this larger example. And we will see how we can structure and organize our code. So 10 minutes break. In the course, when I used to have this lecture surrounding the DOM, I used to call this lecture Once Upon a Time in Springfield. And then we kind of had the DOM, the events and timers and stuff all cramped into one lecture, and I was able to live code an example as well in that lecture. And that example is called Bartboard. And that example is nowadays an exercise instead. So it is an exercise with instructions. However, I have an extended demo coding that Bartboard. And in that one, you're supposed to create, basically you're supposed to create this board, this blackboard, where Bart is supposed to be able to write the same sentence over and over and over again, looking something like this. So if we have a look at this application, it's only kind of a div element. The blackboard is a div element with some styling, with borders and a background color, and then all of this text is added to that element. And then when you press the mouse button, it should start writing letter for letter, and when you release the mouse button, it should stop. That is for next week when we talk about events and how to trigger things depending on what the user does. But in this, I mean, for today's lecture, you would be able to create this out of nothing, right? You would be able to create a div element, add a class called board or something like that, and add it to the document, and create text nodes and add those text nodes to that div element. Oh, sorry. I always forgot to press the button, but now you will see it. However, I mean, that is a totally legit way of doing it. Nothing wrong with that. And if you want to create, I mean, you can encapsulate that into a class. So you have a class called Bartboard, and when you instantiate a new class, that class will create the element, inject it into the DOM, on a place that you have chosen. You can do all of that with the knowledge you have. However, there is a cleaner way of doing it, or a way. There is a better looking way of doing it. So if you have a look at this line, wouldn't it be neat to have your own HTML element called Bartboard and just be able to write it in the HTML as it is? Like that, and the Bartboard will show up, basically creating your own elements, your own HTML elements. And you're able to do that with something called custom elements. This is kind of new. Don't mind the second 0 version. The version 1 is the one that is now. So you can see that Firefox will start supported in the next major release. It's supported, but you need to add a flag to the browser if you want to try it out. Chrome has supported it since version 67. Safari is kind of supporting it. They have a bug on certain things, but it's pretty well supported. Even the Samsung browser is supporting it. But it's fairly new. But with custom elements, you can create your own elements. You might need, I mean, think about Spotify or Slack. In Spotify, for instance, you have quite clear components if you look at the application. You have some kind of player controls. You have some kind of carousel of record covers, for instance, and you have a search bar, and you have so if you start to analyze applications, you will find that they are a lot of small components, and it would be really neat if those components could be described with just a simple HTML element. It would be so much easier to positioning stuff in the browser when you just could like have those as elements. You would also increase reusability a lot if you could like write reusable components and share them in some kind of library. That is called web components, and it's a fairly new concept. Well, has a couple of years at least since it started, but it's not we are not there yet. The browser support is still quite poor. Well, custom elements works kind of, but there are certain other things that don't, and we will actually go through all of those in separate lecture or in another lecture. But I would like to introduce custom elements right now, because I think custom elements is a perfect way for you to package your code. Because one thing that people said last year and the year before was that it was quite hard to code in the browser because you had no clear rules of how to package the code and how to begin and how to end. You can do it in so many different ways. The same thing as with JavaScript. So you have a language, JavaScript, that is really free, and then you have all of those APIs. You can do things in many different ways. So it was asked to have a way of structuring your code in an easier way in this course, and I think at least that custom elements is one of those solutions. At least when we've tried this on Kalmar students that will take this next before Christmas, and they tried it last year, and they gave it a thumbs up because they felt that it really gave them a way of structuring their code. So we will have a look at how we can do this. So in this case, I'm creating a bartboard, and I want to add this text as an attribute. You can do it in many different ways, but this is how I've chosen. I'm in the examples. I will go through this step by step as well and code it, and we will look in the browser what happens. So I will just introduce it now and look at my examples and demos, because you will see me coding it there. So there are some things you need to do to create your own elements. The first one being you need to create a constructor function, or if you like, a class, even though saying that we have class in JavaScript, that is a little bit so-so. But this is the easiest way of doing it. You could use prototypical inheritance and things like that, but if you use this syntax, it's quite neat. So we create a class called bartboard that extends window.html elements. So we are basically saying we want to extend a window element, an empty element. You can an HTML element. You can extend other elements as well. You could extend the video element, for instance, if you want to change the behavior of a video component. But we will start out with an empty HTML element. We need to tell the browser that we have a new element that it should register and that it should use. And we do that by window.customelements.define. So we're defining a new custom element. We must give it a name, and we will point to the constructor function, or in this case the class bartboard that should be instantiated from. We need to name it with a dash in the middle. You cannot name it in camel casing, for instance, because this dash will tell the browser that this is a custom element, so that you will not get conflict with built-in elements. So if Chrome or if the standard would like in the future to add a bartboard to the implementation in all browsers, because that has become a thing, then it will be named Bart and with a as one word, bartboard, not with a dash in between, because dash custom elements, no dash built-in elements. So that's the distinction. Okay, we do that in our JavaScript file. Then we inside of our HTML we can use this bartboard text like that, and we could even, if we like, use the DOM APIs like document create element bartboard, and we can set attributes, and we can work with this element as it were what other element in the world. So this is just a simple thing. However, we need to do some stuff to make it recognize the attributes. You see I have a dot 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 inside of the class here. And that's what we will look at now. So when we extend these HTML elements, we need a constructor, and we need to call the super. So we need to call the HT elements constructor in this case to be able to set things up properly in the browser. We can override a function called connected callback. Connected callback, or a method. The connected callback is called when this element is added to the document. Basically when you do an append child. Or when the rendering engine finds it in the initial parsing of the page. Then connected callback will be called. So this is kind of a neat place, because in this one you know that, okay, someone has added this element to the document. Now we can do stuff with the element. Start a network connection if it's a connected element, for instance, that should fetch things from a server. It's unnecessary to do it in the constructor, because it might be that you are creating elements without adding them to the DOM, and then they probably don't need a network connection until they get added to the DOM. In this one, we should do this as well. We will see if it has the attribute text set. And so basically, if someone has done this, text will be, I will not pollute the global scope. And if that is the case, we will use that text. Otherwise, we will create just an empty text node. Otherwise, text will be null, and that is not so nice. It will say null, 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 null on the page. If someone says no text, it will be empty. And then we are adding the text to the text content. So we are adding the text to inside of this bartboard. This is just a fancy way of repeating the text 10 times. You can do it using a for loop if you like. Okay. So this takes care of the initialization. However, if the attribute is changed, if someone dynamically changes the text attribute afterwards, we need to reflect that change back to the text content, right? And let's see how we do that. I've moved, instead of doing this initial rendering inside of the connected callback, I just moved it to a semi-private update rendering. So I create a rendering method that will update the text content. It's the same thing that we had before. And we can override the observed attribute, or this one, this getter, observed attribute. You can add that one telling the browser which attributes on your element it should observe. So if someone is changing text, the browser will tell you. But if someone is altering another attribute, the browser will not care. So you're basically, on those lines, you're basically telling the browser to watch for changes at the attribute text. And when a change occurs, this method will be called. Attribute changed callback, it must have that name. That one will be called with the name of the attribute being text, the old value that text had before the change, and the new value after the change. And in this case, we're just updating the rendering, because then it will fetch that new, but of course you could have sent the new value into the rendering and written. You can do that in so many different ways, but this is just a simplest way of doing it. And by this, you have made a custom element, more or less a component in the browser. I would actually urge you to, on the let's see, exercises. Let's back up. Tiny Toons, on Tiny Toons, that is just to get you started with the DOM and events, so you could do that as it is. LNU it the same way. But after Bartboard, after you've done this, try to use custom elements on the rest of the exercises. The click game, for instance. This is a game that you will play in the browser by clicking colors. Why not create that as a click game element that you can insert, and you can have several click games at once, for instance. If you do that, you will have an advantage in the third part of the course. So by looking at custom elements on the exercises starting now, you will you will have an advantage on the last examination assignment. Remember, do you remember what the last examination assignment was? Was this, where is it? Where's my recording? Oh, there it is. Was this one? Some kind of desktop with chat applications, a video application if you like, memory application, note applications, different kind of applications that you are able to create and move around and stuff. If those were separate components or custom elements, I think you will have a much easier time orchestrating this application. And as you will notice, one of the applications here is actually a memory application. This is the memory application. You will click like those images and they will turn. If they are the same, they will be removed. That application corresponds quite neatly to the last exercise in the course. So if you've done that exercise, then you have already fulfilled one of the requirements in the last examination assignment. So that is one reason why you shouldn't skip the exercises. And this autocomplete demo, that is just like when you write in Google, you will see that it will add such suggestions for you. When you write something, it will add suggestions. This is that kind of functionality. Well, maybe you can find a way of adding this to your last examination assignment as well. So they're not done in vain. Okie doke. Any questions on custom elements? We have just touched upon the basics of creating custom elements. Will we do that now? Oh, maybe we will. Yeah. We will look at something called a shadow DOM. When I've described the DOM, I've described it as, going back all the way to the top. If we look at this picture, I've described image, and we could have had a video element here as one element. If we add a Bartboard, create our own element, it will be described as one element in this DOM structure. However, if you look at, for instance, can I do this in real time? This is, okay, we will try. This might go to waste, but I hope YouTube is using the video element. Okay, so you can see we have the video element. They have a lot of attributes, but it's a simple element. However, in my browser, this is probably not the same in yours. I've actually switched a flag for me being able to see something called a shadow DOM. So behind each element, there is something called a shadow DOM. So each element has its own space, its own universe. So if I open the video element, you will see that it has a div element. So the video element is a div element containing of other div elements containing other div elements, containing input fields, so buttons and stuff. So the video element on YouTube, or the usual video element, it's actually its own custom element with a lot of HTML and CSS attached to it in something called a shadow DOM. So the shadow DOM is not visible in the DOM structure, but you can always kind of extract it and work with it. Yeah, this is what I'm showing here, actually. And that is pretty neat, because when you write CSS, you have probably all started thinking about, oh, it's so tricky. If I just want to change things inside of my little application, I must take into consideration that I cannot change all piece, because that will affect everything on the page. I can only change things that are under my own ID or something like that, or under this class name or something like that. But if we move the CSS from the original CSS file and place those inside of the shadow DOM, they will live inside the DOM and only affect things inside of that element, that custom element. So this one, I'm creating a template, and this is where this comes in again with creating templates using inner HTML. So I'm creating an element, a template element, and I'm inserting inner HTML to this one. I'm adding a style like that. That's totally allowed to add a style like that. You should avoid it, but in this case it's pretty good. By doing the pseudo class host, I will point to, in this case, the board element. So by doing host, I will reach the board, and I could set that background to something. I could add a P inside of the board where the text should show up. I could do that one. But if I were to style this P element, I could just write color red, and it will affect this one, but nothing outside of the custom element. So it's both side of this element. Then I create my board, kind of the same as last time. I've updated some things. This dot attach shadow. So I'm telling the browser that this custom element wants a shadow DOM. By calling attach shadow, I will use mode open. You will probably all know that there is a closed shadow DOM as well. I'm really not sure what that does. So just use the mode open in this case. And to the shadow root of this element, it has a shadow root, we will append a child, and I clone the and it will take all of this and just insert it into my Bart custom element. And the CSS will be, when we do this on node, the CSS will render as well. And I'm just updating, so text will be written in Bartboard text instead, in this one, in that P element. I don't need to worry about using IDs, because this will be this component. So even multiple Bartboards on the page, will select the one inside of the shadow root in my element, or my custom element. And as I said before, now we are looking at something called web components. There is a good website, I've linked it on the course webpage, that is called Web Components. Web Components is a name for this type of behavior. Custom elements together with the shadow DOM to build our components. They have a lot of best practices. We've tried to kind of cook the practices together and looked at the examples examples when we have constructed our way this. It's a fairly new standard. There are things that I like to change. There are something called HTML that we could use together with the components, so we can import components into the browser. But the support is really poor, and I even think that Safari has flagged for not implementing that at all. Kind of concerns for optimization and with that kind of behavior. But we've tried our best anyways. I would really like feedback on this way of doing it when you start looking at smartboard example, for instance. So if you have feedback, please send it to me. Other ways, smarter ways of doing that without using libraries, that and frameworks. Of course, have coded in like React or Vue or any other framework, you will probably start seeing, oh, but that looks kind of like how you do that in React, or you can use web components using Polymer, for instance. Polymer is a that Google has done to support this in every web components. But to learn Polymer and how they are, I want to do it using libraries. I think this will be a big thing, and it's becoming a big thing for web development. We need a good way of distributing components, reusing components. And this, I think this is a way for you to start. If you have never done on the web before, I think your guidelines and quite best practice, and then you could like, experimenting with client-side on your own. But if you have any comments or thing regarding this, I'm to have questions, so post in Slack or send me a private or whatever. Okay, any questions regarding? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Backticks. I forgot this in about strings. So it's a backtick. It's not a single quote. It's not a double quote. It's a. If you examine your key, you will find it somewhere. Where it is on Mac, it's del or erase and a question mark. You're using that one as well if you're writing code. Please do it. So if you're writing code, add backticks and the code will get a pretty output. Backticks in JavaScript, if you have a string spans that uses like this. So I have a string on lines. If you use a tick, this will work. If you're using single, no, I can't. If you're using a quote, in this case, the automatic colon inserter will colon and end the. But using this, you could have a string like this. You would have to add some kind of slash in the end or something, indicate that we have a new line. So if you want to do things like that. There are even you can use params in backtick strings in a good way. Maybe because I have a couple of minutes. Bob, do I have a? Okay, so I have a simple app.js. Now we're in Node, but it doesn't matter actually. Look. A very simple, just to show what you can do with the back. You can use this parameter syntax to insert things from outside of the string. So it is the name inside the string. If you use a regular you would have to do it like welcome space name plus this. So this is a better syntax that, and I wouldn't be surprised if that faster as well. This one, okay, that string stuff probably optimized, but it's probably the way I often want to do it. 8 strings. I think in this example we are using backtick. So what I would like to do with this, I haven't told yet, is to the problem writing HTML side of a JavaScript. That is, the IDE will recognize that this is HTML, so it will not colorize it and indent it in the code. So it would be nice if you could have a small HTML for this content, and then just that HTML file. Doing that, but clean way, doing requests to the server. Hello, that might, I'm looking into actually. But I will tell you if I way. For this course, this is, I think. So, I have like, I think 10. What today manipulating we're done. That doesn't make rockets fly. It's only like, okay, so the page and then the page, so it's a static page once again. I mean, it's less to just this. Next week or morning, we will go to something called events. And events is the ability for you to act upon things happening in the so you can react upon a user dragging, scrolling the page, writing on the board, things updating on the server, react to events. And when you react on events, you can change a so if it's writing something on a browser, you can send a message to the server and back to the browser. You can insert Anna is message, and then do exciting stuff. But this is essential to modify the DOM. That is what we will do all the time. So, we will start looking at events as we'll look at concept because it goes hand in hand. We will look into concept asynchronous programming, and it's probably of those things that will feel weird for you with a background. You're quite used to running programs in a structured way. You might have threads, but JavaScript we don't have threads. Single threaded. We have another mechanism, asynchronous programming, called. We will have a look at week as well. But the concept that is, if it's something really important, I mean, if you grasp this way of thinking, good, because probably that people has hardest to grasp how things are happening in the browser synchronously and to program against things happening in the order are happening. Being able to stop the execution code in the middle of a then that will restart when something has happened, things like that. We will look at that as well. After the lecture, you will be able to do the examination as well. So please watch this one. You can watch now. Or in English, you can watch the Swedish. If you're English, you can watch the English. It doesn't matter. It's the same from last year. I don't know why it says 2007. But events, I call that one in addition. Wrong with this recording, but I would like to ask English version, please. Version should be up because it's new. Questions? You had no questions. Then we will actually end by 6. Okay? Thank you.